And it's partly you, because it's you that's interested, but it's partly the world calling to you, because you don't get to say what makes you interested, right? It sort of happens to you.
Yeah.
It's a synchronicity, like it's a place where the narrative and the objective touch. And so if you decide to go off your pathway and investigate what interests you, and you investigate it enough, you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and if you go deep enough, you get on sacred ground, and that's where you're getting so deep that you're starting to study that which everything depends on. And then if you continue to study, you'll get right to the bottom of things itself. That's Moses' encounter with the divine, and if you do that, you will be a leader, right? And so you say, well, what guides you when you're lost? Well, the manifestation of intrinsic meaning guides you when you're lost. You can hear that in music, like music plays out the balance between chaos and order properly, and it sort of tells you what is intrinsically meaningful and necessary and beautiful and true, all of that. And it's so cool because it works out neurologically, really. Like, it is the case that you advance developmentally on the edge of chaos, right? Because you have to push yourself to advance.
Yeah.
That's what you do when you play. Like if you're playing one-on-one basketball with someone, you don't want to be 6'4" and play with your like 4'2" nephew and just stomp him to death. And you think, well, why not? Because you could beat the little bastard non-stop. It's like, I'm the victor. You don't want that, right? You want to find someone who can push you. Maybe you want to play with someone who's slightly better than you. Now, why? Because it's harder to win. And the answer is, well, the win means that you're developing. That's the meta win. And you obtain the meta win on the border of chaos, and that's also the place where the hero operates, and that's where you find the dragon and all of that. It's exactly the same thing. And meaning, the instinct of meaning signifies that developmental edge. And the constant mythological insistence is that God is to be found at the core of what makes itself manifest as meaning. And that's a definition, you know, and say, well, people think, well, you know, I don't believe in God. It's like, the belief in God is not adherence to a set of semantic propositions. That's just not how it works. It's not like reading a set of descriptors and saying, I concur. It's not that at all. It's being guided by, well, it's being guided by the spirit of truth. That's one way of thinking about it. Guided by the spirit of adventure. That's another way of thinking about it. And it's faith in meaning. It's faith in truth. Those aren't propositional ideas. And they fit the neurology perfectly, because the instinct of meaning manifests itself on the edge of development. That's how your brain's set up.
So if you're floating around in chaos because one of your belief systems failed, whether that's your job or your belief in the medical system or your relationship or something like that, your suggestion is wait for something meaningful to appear, because it'll appear, and then pursue it.
Or watch. Like, one of the things you do with people who are depressed, if you're a behavioral therapist, is you say, okay, let's have you track your mood for the next 2 weeks. Like, you're going to think, because you're depressed, it's like, how do you feel? 2 out of 10. Win. Always. It's like, no, not always. If you track your mood, you'll find that even if you're severely depressed, you'll vary, say, between 0 and 4 out of 10. Okay, so now it might be that you find, this is very common, you find that even though you don't want to see your friends, if you're with them, you're at 4. Okay. And then maybe there'll be some other things. If I listen to music, if I'm painting, if I'm working out, if I'm building, a shelf or whatever, there'll be different things that people find compelling. My mood lifts. And here's some other things I'm doing where I'm at 0.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's start doing fewer of the 0 things and more of the 4 things and see how far we can go. And then maybe you practice that for a month, and now you're doing some 6 out of 10 things. Like, there'll be domains of your life that make themselves manifest as more able to chase away the darkness. And you need to discover what those are. And you have to be humble, which is, you don't know, because what do you know about yourself? The things that you find meaningful, that make themselves manifest as meaningful, you might not want to even admit. Like, maybe you have a woman who's hell-bent on her career for ideological reasons, but if you get her to track her mood, she's far happier when she's with her kids. Or the reverse, right? You might have a woman who would like to believe that having her children is enough, but if you track her mood, you find that if she isn't out pursuing her career, 30% of the time, she's devastated. And it's an empirical, you call this in behavioral therapy, you call this collaborative empiricism. And so the idea is, well, I don't know who the hell you are, and neither do you. So how about we watch, and that's humility. It's right, like, I don't know. And you have to be brought to your knees to watch that seriously. Well, and so then you can find, and then, there's a reliable pattern to the things that make your life meaningful. So, and this is one of the things I've talked to my audiences a lot about, is that so you might say, well, I want to be happy. And people say that all the time, and they don't even know what the hell they mean when they say that. What they actually mean is that they don't want to suffer too much.
Yeah.
But they don't say, I don't want to be unhappy. They say, I want to be happy. But happiness is incentive reward, and it only occurs sporadically when you're pursuing a goal. And happiness has its dangers too, because it makes you impulsive. And when people say they want to be happy, they actually don't know what they mean. And what they really mean is something like, I want to have a meaning that will sustain me even through catastrophe. And that's not happiness, because when you're in a catastrophe, which you will be, or maybe always are, you're not going to be happy. Okay, so where do people find meaning? And my conclusion, fundamentally, it's not mine, this is this fundamental axiom of Western civilization, is you find true meaning in voluntary self-sacrifice, right? So it's like, you have a great relationship with your kids, you're a mother. Well, it means you've given up yourself to a large degree to foster that relationship. Same with your relationship with your partner. Like, it's not self-martyrdom, but it's in that responsible shouldering of the virtues of the relationship that the meaning arises. And the most reliable source of meaning is responsible self-sacrificial conduct. And so here's something very cool. I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre with Jonathan Pageau. It's in Jerusalem, and it was the first church. Now, it's hypothetically situated on the place where Christ hung himself on the cross. It was hung on the cross. And so what does that mean? Well, at minimum, psychologically, it means that the community is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. That's what it means. And so you have the cross at the center of the church, and that's the place of the altar, that's the place of sacrificial offering. Then you have the church surrounding that, then you have the town surrounding that, and then the community itself, and this was the pattern for European towns for centuries, the state surrounding that. But the thing at the middle was responsible voluntary self-sacrifice towards a higher good, right? And it took people thousands of years to delineate out that vision. You see it developing through the Old Testament, but it's fully realized in many ways in the New Testament, with the idea that you have to bear the weight of death voluntarily, and also the weight of hell, of malevolence. You have to take that onto yourself. And in doing so, you transcend it. In doing so, you also act out the foundation of community itself. And of course that's true, because if I'm going to be in a community, I have to give up myself, like my short-term, merely me-focused self. Obviously, that's the definition of community. If it's me first, always, there's no community. So, to me, these things, they've started to become almost truisms. It's like, well, obviously, community, the stable, healthy community is predicated on voluntary self-sacrifice. Like, well, how else could it be? No sacrifice? No, that's not going to get you anywhere. The sacrifice of other people? Well, that's a little convenient for you. Plus, the other people don't exactly appreciate it. And so, if you're a good mother, there's
so much easier that way.
Well, right, it is in the short term. But that's the other thing. It's actually not easier. So psychopaths do that all the time. They sacrifice other people to their own whims at the drop of a hat. So what happens to psychopaths? Well, they end up in prison. They fail to learn from experience. They have to wander from town to town. Like, they end up in hell. It doesn't work because people catch on, usually. And then there's hell to pay. Like, literally. So there isn't an alternative. And you might think, well, who the hell wants the path of voluntary self-sacrifice? Like, fair enough, with the cross and hell, it doesn't exactly sound like a picnic. But if you know that the alternative is hell, then you think, well,
Yeah. It also, at least from what I've gone through, it seems to get easier. Like the first time it happens to you, or a belief system falls and you're in chaos, it's pretty horrible for quite a while. But then you kind of get used to it. That's what I found anyway.
Yeah.
So then the next thing that happens, well, maybe it's worse than the first thing that happens. But then each dramatic thing that happens after that, it's like, oh, you know what? I already did this once
Right.
and I survived. And then I think you can take
See,
on
then-
more risk.
Well, then you also have a different conception of what you are, because
Yeah.
here's conception one. I am what I believe. Okay, that's great as long as it's working, but as soon as your belief collapses, well then who are you? And then the next conclusion is, I'm whatever is left over when my belief system collapses. And that's the depressive, nihilistic state. It's like, well, you know, everything's up in the air and life is fundamentally misery and I'm this disoriented thing, and that's the essential nature of being. You know, stable state, collapse into chaos. I'm the stable state, no, I'm chaos, no. Well then, order reemerges from chaos, and now you think, well, I'm the new order. And that's the fervor of a convert, but then it collapses. And then you do that 5 times and you think, oh, I see, I'm the thing that does this. Right, that's right, that's Sisyphus. It's the voluntary acceptance of the fate of Sisyphus. You're the thing that's rolling the stone up the mountain, and then it rolls back down, but it's a different mountain each time, and maybe each peak is higher, right? And so then you're the thing that transforms. That's why in the Judeo-Christian ethos, in the Judeo-Christian narrative world, your soul is identified with the dying and resurrecting Savior, because you're the thing that goes through this process of purification by repeated deaths and rebirths, right? And so then you're the thing that withstands the repeated deaths and rebirths in the favor of the emergence of a higher order, you know, and the pathway of that's Jacob's ladder. That's the pathway to paradise. That's the hero's path. That's why Jung said that Christ was a symbol of the self. Because that core self isn't what you believe, and it's not the catastrophe that ensues when belief disintegrates. It's the process by which you're honed in fire by repeatedly encountering, you know, what's salutary and transforming. And then if you identify with that, the more you identify with that, the more you can say, bring it on.
Yeah.
Right? And the ultimate extent of that is probably something like embracing your enemy. And you think, well, how the hell can I do that? It's like, here's a hypothesis. The more you could embrace the worst enemy, the more radically you could transform for the better. Right? Because the worst enemy is going to bring everything that could possibly take you out against you.
Worst enemy in an idea way or as a person?
Either way. Either way. Whatever knocks you off your feet.
Yeah,
Now
okay.
you think, well, something's coming to knock me off my feet. You might think, well, maybe I could use what knocks me off my feet to shed what's most useless about me. And you know, we've seen this